Right, you're welcome back. This is NewsFile. Thanks for staying with us. And my guest, Osei Bonsu Dickson, who has been working and in charge of the national security, from the national security perspective on the Operation COVID-19, and Kofi Abochi and Colonel Festus Abuaji on Skype. Now, you were assisting us to understand, and you sought to mention how, for example, people are being added onto perhaps the prisons and on remand, and the fear already that something may be there.
Right.
So how do we navigate all of this? Because people are violating, and they must be dealt with. If they are being remanded, that's lawful.
They have to be dealt with, but it's important for us to remember we're in a certain circumstance. There's a law that has been passed restricting people's movements. Now, if this law is violated, and is violated en masse, if we have the numbers of people who are out there, as we're being told, violating the law, the criminal justice system is going to be compromised, is going to be challenged. Already, our prisons are overflowing with prisoners. The police stations do not have enough holding cells capacity to contain the numbers of people who may violate it and may probably have to be released after a day or two, having been kept at the police station. So we get to a point where the criminal justice system simply cannot contain the numbers of violations if you have mass violations of a particular law. And that is why it's important at this stage that we appeal to the consciences of people to simply be law-abiding. Criminal justice is only effective if the deviants are few, if they're in the minority. But when you have a number of people, too many people violating it, then you have a problem. Now, there's a psychosocial aspect to this. There must be a sense of ownership as far as what is happening is concerned. Our children, ourselves, our families, our older people, all kinds of people to whom we owe responsibility. This disease is not just about you. It is about your prospect of spreading it to people who have nothing to do with your irresponsibility, your recklessness, or your misbehavior. And that's why it's imperative that we do not talk strict law at this point. The law has been passed, and so technically speaking, what is being done is actually legally sanctioned and is legally allowed. So whoever is in violation should not simply take advantage of the crowd and say, well, if you have too many people violating this, we can't be arrested, so let's just go and do whatever it is we want to do. At the end of the day, you're actually imperiling not only your life, not only the life of the community, but overall of the country. So criminal law is not the answer to this. The violations will not necessarily be met by arrests and prosecution, nor is police brutality also the answer to that. So we have to have a compromise. And that compromise is we need to have a sense of ownership of the process. Everybody is a stakeholder in this. And if the collectivity believes that it is our collective behavior that will ensure that we're able to overcome this deadly disease, which has been described as the unseen enemy, then all of us should just own the process, or rather own the sense of compliance, as opposed to resisting it, because resisting it is simply actually signing a pact to the virus, and I don't think that is in anybody's interest.
Is there not the danger of people being arrested for violation when in fact it is their genuine circumstances that lead them to being arrested and being labeled as violating the measures?
And by genuine circumstances, you mean, for example, going to the market?
A policeman simply doesn't understand me. I say, I'm going to do X. A policeman says, I don't trust you. I don't think you're able to do it. This is what your intention is. And he picks you up. He takes you away.
Right. And that's what I spoke about when I mentioned the psychosocial aspect of this. It's a psychosocial in the sense that people must believe that the enforcement is in their interest in order for them to comply. At the same time, the police must also have the sense of duty to administer the law, to administer their duty in a manner that is appreciated, if you like, by the common person who finds himself at the other end of the law in this respect. But if there's a sense of repression, if there's a sense of brutality, then there will be resistance. And that's part of the difficulty. And so this is where you need to have police training and professionalism at its optimal best. Because once there's that sense of repression, and once there's that sense of brutality, that someone is trying to, curtail our liberties, not in our own interest, but because of an ulterior agenda, then you're going to have a resistance. And once you have the resistance, then we're in a difficult terrain. So I think at this stage, what we need is to have that psychosocial aspect of law enforcement at its optimal best, where people believe that what is happening and the enforcement of the law is in the best interest of the citizenry, of whom or of which that person is a micro unit of the overall Ghanaian polity. But if there's that sense of repression, that someone is abusing his rights, or rather someone is abusing his authority, and basically is not, and I've witnessed a few instances where sometimes I think the communication may not have been quite at its best.
Right.
And, but again, what can you do? In the circumstances of where we find ourselves, our police people, not all of them are as well trained as we will expect. And so certainly we can't expect that they have become angels. We should give them time. But ultimately, let's just remember that the police themselves are putting themselves at risk. I mean, they stand on the street, they encounter all kinds of people, they interact with all kinds of people, and they are doing their possible best to ensure that the streets are clean of people and that all of us stay at home so that the virus doesn't spread. And if we are fighting the police, not only are we endangering them with the physical interaction by way of our not complying, but we forget the fact that they are exposing themselves by standing on the streets to help the whole country scale this difficult tide. So I think we should look at the bigger picture and stop being a bit resistant.
And Osebos, who is itching to say something, I don't know what you want to say in addition to what he's saying, because you are the guys who are sort of, responsible at the forefront and making sure that, what Colonel Festus Abaji and others are preaching, some democratic policing, is what goes on.
Yeah, so in part, what Kofi is talking about is something that I really subscribe to. What I want to add to it is that we are, yes, in uncharted waters, but we are not actually in uncharted waters when it comes to operational, deployment.
Right.
So this is one aspect of operational deployment which is not entirely new to the police service. Neither is it new to joint force or maybe joint task force operations. So to that extent, they have experience and have battle readiness for that kind of issue.
But obviously not normal times, because national security will not interface with us the way you are doing in these times.
No, absolutely. I mean, that is it. I mean, this is a very, it's a novel situation,
right,
to that degree. But I'm talking about the fact of police and military forces joining task forces together to be able to work and come to some good understanding about the situation and help us out of it. Now, what I want to say is a couple of things. One is that in all operations, citizen cooperation is very, very important.
Right.
And so one would observe that, for example, I mean, there's been a lot of effort made into communicating the fact that it is a humanitarian operation and that our citizens need to comply out of a sense of duty. A sense of duty is required on them. We ought to see it from that perspective. Now, the laws and the rules are also very clear. And so the issues about, arresting people is also something to be talked about.
Right.
It's something actually on the drawing cards. I mean, there are people who've been sent, for example, I've got reports, C-trips about people who've been sent to Fadama Magistrate Court, Kaswa and co. So all those kinds of things, you cannot leave any facet of it and say that, well, maybe the places will be overpopulated. So we would have to take some action really against that.
Right.
For example, I mean, apart from the fact that you're dealing with fiscal situations, the situation is also such that a lot of people are also taken to cyberspace. And so you have virtual actions that are taking on a new form of it's taking some kind of infractions are being organized in virtual spaces. You're seeing fake videos, for example, pop up and all those things. Now, for a lot of, for example, these fake videos, and I want to make this kind of comment, a lot of videos that we have seen, in fact, we've taken about like 36 videos to particularly study and to see. I mean, you would see two main strands of issues there. First being videos that are out of context, taken from one context, voiced over, and then made to apply as if it's part of Operation COVID safety, handicaps or problems and things like that. I mean, we've seen that type of videos. We have also seen videos, so those are videos that really do not, they have no real connection with the event except the misrepresentation that is being carried forward. If you take that apart, you're dealing with some infractionary behavior on the part of the forces, actually on the street. That some of those things are fact. And there are a few of those things that one can talk about.
Okay.
But even so, I keep telling people that, so for example, you have about, statistically, you have about you have about like 2,000 spots where security forces, for example, can be found. I mean, at various checkpoints, snap checks and things like that. If you add all those kinds of things together, nationwide, you hear, for example, that police have encounters with the civilian populace and or the military has had some contact with them, and what have they, and maybe have acted untowardly towards them. I mean, punish them in a manner that isn't appropriate. Some call it brutalities and things like that. If you sum up the number of those ones, as against about a 2,000 deployment, I mean deployment in specific areas where we want them to be positioned, you have about like 10 such actions maybe at any one time going on. It pales in complete significance to the broad, well-organized operation that is actually on the ground.
Okay.
And so the infractions that you sometimes find, I mean, even if you pick videos, for example, about 80 to 90% of videos that you're seeing are actually are fake. You are left with about some another 10%.
That's terribly dangerous. Let's get to Festus Abuaji, and I wanted to find out, you seem to be generally satisfied with how far they have gone with the operations, seeing that there's likely that we may extend, or it might even go to geographically other places where they are not under lockdown already. What would you say by way of your advice in the approach of the security enforcement of the lockdown?
Well, let me first make a statement on the point of the fake videos and all their genuineness and so on and so forth. See, in this kind of environment, it is not the numbers of fake versus genuine videos. It is the impact on the psyche of the population. So even if there is one genuine video, let's take it the one by the psyche of the Ghanaian population is that forces have shot a civilian. So it's not about the numbers. And indeed, the government should not focus on disputing the numbers of. The authorities must focus on effective, constructive public information, about those few videos that are genuine. Let me leave that. Part of the challenge for the security forces is that there is no organization. That has been said. It's come out very clearly during the second segment and some of the remarks made by Dickson and Professor Aboki. We need some organization. So, if today, for instance, food is going to be distributed, I cannot see how food can be distributed to any community without the involvement of the community itself, i.e. the assembly or the unit. It's very unfortunate that some highly placed persons, political entities, have said that we cannot entrust this food distribution to assembly members because not all of them are part of our party. But this coronavirus, time and again, has been explained that it doesn't know political coloration. It just knows human beings to target. So I think whether we like it or not, we need to bring in the element of community engagement. And through community engagement, the security forces versus NADMO and other actors from the Ministry of Social Affairs, whether they are the project officers and their implementing partners, i.e. those persons who are delivering the food, must engage with the community leadership. It makes the work easier for the security forces than for the security forces now to apply their effort in social distancing and controlling crowds that are out of proportion. If we can work on that organization, I think the public health objective will be attained and the security objective will be attained. Let me bring out another dimension that probably we're all overlooking. And it is a dimension that security forces are not superhuman beings. They are as susceptible to this virus as anybody else. And I don't think all of them, as required, have been issued with the appropriate protective gear, i.e. whether face mask or hand gloves or whatever it is. The earlier we did that, the better. And when we talk about face masks, we are told that every 5 hours or every day or so, they've got to be changed. The question is, since this operation started, according to the numbers given by Mr. Dickson, if 4,000 of them have been deployed, have we issued every day 4,000 face masks to these security forces? Every day. If not, are we not endangering the very personnel who are supposed to now ensure that there is control?
Right. In fact, when I was driving here, I saw some police officers, they had no masks. And I think the situation is not different in many other places.
Listen to you?
Okay, you can end on that note, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. That's fine.
Thank you very much. Festus Abuaje, retired, helped us to analyze a bit of the security situation. But there's some bit of a question I actually wanted to, ask him about it, but I felt you may address that a lot more appropriately. The people we are arresting, of course, the people who violate, when we take them to court, by the law, when it's supposed to be a summary, trial, can't we this time ensure that we are actually doing summary trials? You arrest people, they go to court, instantly the process rolls out, it finishes quick, so they know their fate. And if they are convicted, rather than put them in some cell or jail, let them do some community service in a COVID-19 operation. Can't we roll out something like that immediately?
Unfortunately, you can't, because the thing about judicial proceedings is that they are regulated by law. First of all, the Constitution says that everyone who is arrested or detained is entitled to legal representation. I've been told to stop doing this, but I can't keep coming down. Is entitled to legal representation. So everyone arrested, whether in an emergency context or not, is entitled to legal representation. Now, once they go to court, their lawyers are also allowed to take advantage of all legal tools there is in defense of their clients. And that's where the delay normally starts, interlocutory applications, all kinds of legal battles.
But the law provides for summary trials.
Absolutely. But summary trial doesn't imply that you ignore legal representation and you ignore legal rights that are allowed a person in a proceeding. Normally, it is the legal rights that are allowed you in legal proceedings that cause the delays.
So can't we have the legal representation, everything done, and make sure that this is done very fast?
Well, then it can. The court has to decide how it sits, and that's what the problem is. If the court wants to do an extended sitting, the court can. Okay. Instead of sitting and rising and coming back after a week, if the court decides to sit 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row, they can dispose of these cases. That can be done. The question of the penalty, again, this is a question of law. If the law allows for community service, then that can be done. If the law allows for fines, of course, that can be administered.
The law doesn't mention community
That's
service.
what the problem is. We don't have these, what we call alternative sentencing. You know, we have very limited sentencing in Ghana. And so either fines or custodial punishment.
And this law simply says if you're found guilty, you are paying a minimum 12,000 and a maximum 60,000.
Right.
Or you go to jail.
Correct.
Up to 10 years.
So there's a custodial punishment or there's a fine. The law goes by the old approach, which is problematic. If the law had given the alternative discretion to the judge to decide how he punishes you.
So once there's no discretion, we cannot contemplate this.
You can't.
You are either paying 12,000
or you're going to jail.
Or between 12,000 and 60,000, or in addition to that, you can get 4 years or up to 10 years in jail. Now, national security, and I'll come to Abochi to end with, there's some development that we may not be paying attention to, but Professor Peter Kote mentioned it. People are losing their jobs. How are they losing the jobs? We know about the legal principles of force majeure and frustration coming into contracts with people and so on and so forth. How should the employers and the employees negotiate, these situations in such a way that it doesn't hurt the employer too much and doesn't hurt the employee, or it doesn't lead to legal battles after COVID-19 or even right during COVID-19. But in your case, national security, we have known you to make interventions in food, and water supply and distributions. Are you involved in these things as well? Professor Kote also mentioned that we may come to a time where it's not just the food that the people need that you have to supply. It's not just the water and electricity you are paying for, but there may be need for toiletries, other things. What are you guys thinking about?
Okay, so to look at the first point that you raised, I mean, about whether maybe national security can make incursions into, largely private arrangements or maybe contracts that are done. Maybe
no, I was asking that Abochi will address.
Oh, I see. Okay, so primarily you are interested in our interventions in the area of, we're interested in humanitarian accompaniment to whatever operation that we're launching. Because, I mean, like you rightly have seen, NADMO is part of this operation. And so NADMO maps out the catalog of things that the various needy communities should be served with or should be given and things like that. So they come out with those kinds of lists. Really, that isn't something which devolves to us. So the National Disaster Management Organization, every year for all hazard situations, comes out with those kinds of, they have the parameters. If it moves into certain escalatory issues that require particular forms of like types of food, blankets, or if it transcends blankets and moves into, I don't know, maybe any other thing, maybe for housing, I mean, housing purposes, where people should lie, where, it's actually their province.
Okay.
And it's something that they would discuss with us for us to help to expedite it. Now, let me say one of the things which comes out of operations like this. So, in the first instance, we act as a coordinating center to ensure that government's response is not only enabled, but is effective. So the efficacy of the responses that government gives. So that is it.
So in your coordination, are you ensuring, for example, that the police personnel or the COVID-19 personnel out there are getting their masks, they're getting changed? Because we are seeing a lot of them around town. They don't have anything, they're not wearing masks. They're already endangering their lives. Professor Sabuaji asked that question.
Oh yes, so that's something that is, so the first obligation that we have is to protect the Ghanaian people.
Okay.
The people who run to rally support for them are personnel whose importance we can't overemphasize.
All right.
So constantly in our meetings, one of the things that comes up is a PPE issue. And the PPE issue is not by no means actually left to, I mean, there's no shortage of it that is only referable to health personnel. It is something that today, as we speak, cuts across all first responders. I mean,
all right, we are running out of time, but if Abochi will address the question I was asking briefly, should employers just unilaterally say, you are terminated because COVID-19, we can't work? Can they actually do that?
From a strict legal perspective, yes, they can. From a strict legal perspective, frustration of contracts, the contracts can be discharged on grounds of frustration. And frustration can happen by reason of what you call a force majeure. A force majeure happens where a fundamental event has happened which was outside of the contemplation of the parties to the contract, but which has rendered the performance of the contract impossible. So if that happens, as it seems to have happened in this case, employers are allowed in principle to do that. But that's the strict legal one. The one I would speak of is the pragmatic one. The pragmatic approach, in my opinion, should lead to rather a suspension. So contracts should go into suspensory mode. I would expect at this stage that trade unions together with employers will sit and negotiate pragmatic models that will keep contracts suspended until times are normalized. But the idea of mass termination of contracts, even though strictly speaking in law, that is allowed, I suspect that in the circumstances of what we find ourselves, if the matter even comes before a court of law, the court may take a more pragmatic approach. That, you know, one of suspension as opposed to termination.
All right. Thank you very much. And I guess for the second segment have been Osei Bonsu Dickson, Chief Legal Advisor, National Security Council Secretariat and Director for Media and Communications, Government Operation Covered Safety. Kofi Abochi's immediate past dean, the Gimpa Law School. Professor Peter Kote also joined us with ISE at University of Ghana, and of course Colonel Festus Abuaje retired. I'm Samson Ladia Yanine, as always. Have a good afternoon. Let's all take care, be safe.